I'm so glad to be here, by the way, and so grateful for the work of Trafficking Justice. It's just doing amazing work fighting this issue and protecting people who are vulnerable. This is an issue which is really kind of counterintuitive for many of us, and so I'm viewing my role at the start of things here is just to kind of lay a foundation understanding the dynamics of exploitation trafficking. You're going to hear from two amazing people following me, but I just want to make sure that we're all kind of clear about the basics of this issue, because I said it's so different than we might think. I want to start, there we go, with just a warning that, that as you might expect, there may be some content that you find upsetting, that may be kind of graphic. Certainly, if you feel concerned at any point, or just if you want to take a break for whatever reason, please feel free to do that. But just to make sure you understand the nature of this particular topic. I'm going to start off then with a movie clip, a situation that happened to a girl in another community, but another state. But I think it provides some pretty good insights into the situation in our community as well. So just sit back, relax, and we're going to talk a little bit about the situation.
Was one of the girls that was involved in our case here in Oklahoma City. She was a child that came out of Wichita, Kansas, and she came from a good family. She had a mom and dad at home early in her life. She attended public schools initially and then went on to even attend private schools. By all accounts, she was, an all-American girl. She was socialized well and educated well, and everything was going pretty good for her through her adolescence and up to her early teens, until she started to experience some issues that led her down a path that she wasn't real proud of.
Probably the year after I went to private school, I started going to a public school, and that was my sophomore year. And I didn't really know who I was. I didn't feel like I fit in anywhere. I didn't really get along with my dad for a while, but it was just normal teenage problems, and I just get depressed at school.
Two of her friends approached her, two young kids, a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old in Wichita. And they collectively, these three young girls, said, "Why don't we run away?" And Angie thought it was not a bad idea, and it might give her a break from what she considered to be a lot of crisis in her life. And one of the girls that she was with said, "Let me call a guy I know in Oklahoma City." And that individual subsequently traveled from Oklahoma City to Wichita, where he picked these three young girls up. Little did they know that he was a pimp.
I started to, feel a little uncomfortable, because now I don't even know where we're going. I'm starting to freak out, because I don't even know who this guy is. And we were driving past Wichita, going to Oklahoma City, and I was just like, I could just get out right now, and I could go home, and I could tell my parents I'm sorry that I left, and it could just be all okay right now. And just then, like, as if he was reading my mind, he turns around and he's like, "Don't even think about asking me to let you out now. You better just tuck and roll." And I was just kind of like, so I'm really gonna have to die before I get to go home now.
As you take this young girl and put her in that environment and have her away from her loved ones, she's going to succumb to that pressure. There's threats of, "I will go get your family." There's threats of, "I'll show these pornographic images to everyone in this town." And he starts to control. And after a very short time, that child has no option but to stay under his command. And for them to break away and to talk to law enforcement or to call and reach out for help, they truly feel, and in some instances it would be safe to say, that their life would come to an end.
We pull up at a truck stop, and it's like an alley just right on the other side of this fence. He tells us to get out. He tells us what kind of prices we're going to charge and exactly what we're going to do. It was like 20 for a blowjob, 40 for sex, and like 80 for both. And so my friend just kind of looks at me, and she's kind of preparing me with her eyes, and then I was just kind of like, "I can help you if you help me, and maybe he won't kill us tonight." So we get out of the car, and he informed us we better not come back without any money. We're walking around. There's lots of semis, and there's also a lot of girls out there, and a lot of them they look like half our age. They look like they could be like 8 or 9 years old. So we go and we're knocking on doors, and we just try to keep smiling, just try to pretend that I wanted to be there, and maybe I could just convince myself that maybe this will lead to something better, and maybe I'm seeing it wrong. And once we got inside the bed of the truck, I started to just wish I was dead or something. We get in the first truck, and the guy decides he wants me, so I go back there, and I just have to just pray to God, just please help me, just please let me get through it. And then Melissa went through his wallet, and he had grandkids as old as us. And all I could think about the whole time was how my grandpa could be this guy right now, and how that would feel. And I just wanted to die. And then I started to just think that maybe I deserved this for doing this to my parents and to myself. And he didn't have enough money, so we had to go to the next one. And that guy kept his wallet. We just kept praying. And we went to 3 trucks, and we still didn't have enough money. And my friend, she was really upset, 'cause she was like, I think he's really going to be upset if we don't have any money. And so we had to keep going in trucks. And sometimes we would stop and we would cry. And she kept saying, if you can be strong, I can do it. And I just kept thinking I had to do it because I didn't want anything to happen to her. And I would never forgive myself if he hurt her because I didn't do what I was supposed to do.
So I think that we have this sense of trafficking. Maybe you come here learning about sex trafficking, something where somebody gets snatched off the street, locked in a closet, something like that. How was it that Angie left her home, right? The way that she left wasn't that she got snatched by the trafficker. How was it that Angie left her home? Somebody could just sort of call out. With a friend, yeah. And how is it that she left? She ran away, right? She was a runaway, yeah. So right away, we're thinking to ourselves that this is a little bit different than we might have thought. And speaking of what you said, she ran away with the friend. It's not even like the trafficker was in touch with her directly. It's the friend of hers who said, we should go away with this guy. And speaking of the friend, right at the very end there, she talked about the kind of control the trafficker was exerting. The agent talked about the trafficker having these threats of showing pornographic images and violence, that sort of thing. Angie didn't even talk about that, right? She said at the end, she was really worried about what he might do to her friend. So right away, I think we can see this is a little more complicated than we might have thought. And then the final piece on this is let's flip perspectives. Think about the guy in that truck who is her grandfather's age, right? These girls are made up to look a little bit older than they might be otherwise. They're wearing makeup, etc. What does he think is going on, do you think? Does he think he's having sex with a sex trafficking victim? Probably not. He's not thinking like that, right? This is prostitution, right? Prostitution. And we have a sense as to what prostitution is. And, it's something which traditionally, it's a choice for the people involved. There's really no victim. We don't like prostitution traditionally because it's just not something you want to have your family around. It's a public nuisance. You wouldn't bring your kids around that truck stop. Decent people wouldn't be there. It would be kind of the traditional view of things. Now, I hope that we realize, in addition to Pretty Woman being a really old movie, and not having any relevance there too, obviously it's also completely untrue. But I want to suggest to you that a movie like Pretty Woman, thinking about a movie like Taken, a movie where there's this immediate abduction, immediate violence, immediate fear. Is that what was going on in Angie's case? Certainly not, right? How do you think Angie felt when she got in the car of that trafficker at the beginning? Was she scared? Probably not, right? She's excited. She's going to be going out on the open road, going to be out with her friends, right? She's not feeling that way at all. So it's really important that we realize that although, yes, the Taken situation is more common than the Pretty Woman situation, in both cases, if these are our guides, if these are our mental maps for what this issue is, we are sorely mistaken and we're going to have some real problems. So instead, what is trafficking? What is exploitation? Well, the reality is we're talking about control that's psychological as much as physical. I'm going to do something to your friend even more and more twisty than anything that he might be doing to her physically, although certainly I have to say I can't think of one of these cases where there wasn't violence involved in some way. We're talking about something that's coercive, it's damaging. The statistics are not very clear because it's such a hidden thing, but I think you're going to agree by the end that the idea that hundreds of thousands of kids and young people, vulnerable people involved is actually probably a pretty low number. And you'll see up there, and it is true, most of the people who are prostituting as adults started when they were kids. The average age of starting is 13. Brain developing, body developing, relationships, etc. So these are really contradictory situations. So we want to be thinking broadly, though, about exploitation. It's all part of the same context, these ways in which someone who has power is taking advantage of somebody else. You know, for example, you'll see up there survival sex, right? That's where somebody is having sex just for food, shelter, the basics. That's the 15-year-old who's on the run, maybe in a different part of Minnesota where, she can stay at this guy's place, but she's going to have to give him a blowjob to be able to do it, going to have oral sex. And if she doesn't, and it's minus 20 outside, and she doesn't have a ride, that's a matter of survival, right? And we know that kind of thing happens all over the place, and that is also exploitation. Even if the person isn't selling her for anything else, any of that stuff, that's all these ways that somebody is taking advantage of somebody else who has that kind of power. Right? So we're going to be focusing, though, for the next while, just on the lower right-hand quadrant of sex trafficking. So what is sex trafficking? Pretty simple, if I can get the slide changed. There we go. It is prostitution where there's a third person involved. So exchange of sex for money, of course, but also food, drugs, shelter, whatever, where there's a third person involved. That third person can be obviously making money. That's the most common thing. But they may be living off the proceeds. They could even be under Minnesota law taking photographs, driving. They can be involved in any sort of way where that third person is involved in this. So this is the kind of the framework we're going to use. So what's our common term for traffickers, kind of culturally? Somebody who's making money off prostitution. Just somebody shout it out. Pimps, thank you. What's our common term for the buyers? Johns, right? Common term for our victim survivors. Prostitute, yeah, what else? There's a lot of terms for them. Hooker, thank you. Hooker, whore, thank you, and hoe. What else? Slut, yep. Escort, call girl. I want to point something out right away, everybody. So, he's the pimp. That's a mixed bag. He or she is. It's a mixed bag, right? He's the John, right? I know there are people in the room named John, right? Perfectly fine name. She is, at best, the escort or call girl, and at worst, a lot of the other terms that we heard there, right? So right away, you can see societally how this is structured. You can see that. Now, why would somebody become a trafficker? And of course, the answer is money and control. There's a lot of money to be made. When I thought that this was like just a Thursday, Friday, Saturday night thing, this is a 24/7. We can place an ad this morning, certainly, but Tuesday morning, tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., 6 a.m., anytime, we can place an ad. The phone's going to be ringing off the hook for weeks, right? And there's a lot of money to flow in. And really, a lot of money, when I present to police officers, we compare to drug trafficking. This is good stuff compared to drug trafficking if you don't have any sort of sense of morality, you don't mind ruining somebody else's life. You sell drugs, you got to get more drugs and sell the drugs again. You sell a human being, you can sell her over and over and over again, right? And you can find, and there's not a problem with that. So we've got a lot of money flowing this way. So our traffickers are very, very motivated by the money that is flowing in. Now, if you're as a trafficker looking for somebody who is going to have sex with lots of people, give you the money, because by the way, the deal is, just to be clear, it's not that like some percentage goes to her, right? The trafficker is going to say, look, I'm going to pay for your food, your shelter, I'm going to take care of you, and then give all the money to me. Now, when he says food, shelter, etc., what does that mean? That means, I'm going to pay for a little bit of food, but, I'm going to keep her skinny, right? Is going to be the idea for that. I'm going to pay for some clothing, some lingerie, some sweatpants and sweatshirts. You don't need a full line of clothing. She is a slut, right, in the term societally. We don't need all that. Right? So the point is you're trying to keep your expenses down, keep your revenues up. So what are you going to look for then if you're a trafficker, trying to find somebody who's willing to do that, who's going to be doing that for you? What sort of qualities might you look for? Anybody?
Look for a person that's very vulnerable.
Person's very vulnerable.
That has family issues.
Vulnerable family issues, and I got it. Yeah, you win the prize. That's exactly right. We're looking for somebody who's highly vulnerable. Highly vulnerable, right? Yes. Highly vulnerable. So what sort of techniques might traffickers use? There's a lot of ways to do this, but one of the most common and one of the least intuitive and therefore useful for us to talk about is this. They target, they trick, they turn, and then finally they traumatize. So the first step is the targeting, and the targeting is exactly right, the highly vulnerable. So what kinds of things? Well, first of all, just being young. right, is a vulnerability, like we talked about. But when you add one of these other things, somebody who's got some kind of addiction to drugs. I have to say past molestation, past sexual abuse, hugely common experiencing this, right? Being on the run, being homeless, pregnant, young kids, all these ways that somebody can be vulnerable. Then when you add in any of these things too, the fact is young kids of color, disproportionately targeted. Native kids, way disproportionately targeted. I'm going to say she and her because it's more commonly girls, but absolutely boys, certainly transgender kids, LGBT kids. The fact is, anybody feeling this lack of connection, lack of support, lack of engagement. And so I want to run a little test here. Think back to your own adolescence, everybody. Raise your hand really high so we can all see it. If you never once felt lonely, ugly, or insecure. You never felt that way, raise your hand. So the rest of us can applaud you. I don't see any hands. Because we all felt pretty crummy about ourselves at some point, right? Pretty bad, right? I mean, the fact is, if you think about it, Angie had a really good life. Things are pretty good for her, right? Private schools, both parents, things pretty good. And she went off the rails. It's kind of all of us go off the rails in some way, the way that was described there. Now, not many of us necessarily run away, but kids do, right? And next thing she knows, she's going to be having sex with a guy her grandpa's age. Like, this can happen to everyone. Having said that, though, we need to be really careful with this issue, not to sensationalize it to say, oh, every one of our kids. Because it's true, any one of our kids can be targeted. But the kids we need to keep the most eye out for, all of us, the kids who are our responsibility, all of us in particular for this are, if I can go back, are these kids and these kids, right? Because if you are, I'm going there we go. Because as a trafficker, that's who you're looking for, okay? You can look for the kid who's got the protective factors, is the term that they use, all the good things going on. But how much easier to go after one of these kids? It's much easier to go after one of these kids. So we all need to be keeping our eyes out for those kids as well, okay? Yeah. All right, so that's the who part, okay? Where am I going to find these kids if I'm a trafficker? Well, of course, any place you find kids. Malls, bus stops, so common. The kid's waiting for the bus, and the guy drives up and says, hey, I'll give you a ride. Now, when she gets in, is he going to immediately abduct her and all that stuff? Possibly, but maybe more. This whole process goes on. I mean, just as we'll get into in a second. So schools, absolutely recruiting happening in schools all over the place, and then definitely online. I think we're all aware of this. There's less of an issue here perhaps, but as I've gone all around the state, I don't care the size of the community. We tell them, if you have the internet, and they do now, right? If you've got kids on the run, if you have kids going through adolescence, this is happening in your community. It just is. And that's where it is. So how does this happen? Well, I had this trafficker on a case of mine a few years ago now. This is back when kids were actually on Facebook. I guess they've probably moved on from now, but at that point they were. And he would find a picture of a girl on Facebook, and he'd send in this message. Thanks for accepting my friend request. I just thought you're so beautiful. Want to get to know what's behind that smile. Okay, lame pickup line. And she kind of says, "What? Don't trip, sweetheart. I ain't looking for nothing. Your looks attracted me to you. This kind of thing. Whoa, hey, sorry. Don't be tripping. I didn't realize you were married. Whoops. What he's doing though is he's going to do this 150 girls in the course of a day. And by the way, how long is that going to take to do? Like maybe an hour, right? You just hit friend and just kind of look for pictures, and there you go. Maybe 50 respond, maybe like 10 he gets into a conversation with, and then one turns into the rest of it, the targeting, tricking, turning, traumatizing. That's great. He's got the one for that day. You get $1,000 off her. He can do it again tomorrow, the next day. Is he going to run out of girls to contact? Of course not, right? There's millions. That's not a problem. Now, who is most likely to respond to this? When I first did this, I would say he'd look for pictures of pretty girls, find pictures of pretty girls online. And my colleague pointed out, she said, no, he's going to look for pictures of girls who probably aren't feeling good about their looks right now, right? That's much better. Right? Because she's going to be more likely to respond. She's going to be more likely to be feeling bad. So when a guy says some lame pickup line like that top line, she's going to respond to that. And the girl who's getting good grades, feeling good about her parents and boyfriends, is she going to respond? No. It's going to be the girl who's in the vulnerable position that's going to be most likely to respond. And again, this is just one technique that was useful when kids were actually on Facebook. We can come up with a million of them, right? That's the targeting. The next step is the tricking, and you can already see it, right? Sure, could abduct, etc. Be charming, be flattering. Maybe become her boyfriend, right? They're together, treated as things. Say, I'm going to take you out to dinner at McDonald's. I'm going to take you. Well, if you're a homeless kid, 15, etc., you'd be thrilled this guy's taking you out to dinner at McDonald's. But over time, right, he's going to be figuring out what's missing in her life. What are those needs? Is it food? Is it shelter? Is it psychological? Is it so commonly these guys end up being called daddy. Probably not a surprise, right? Very often there's just that piece that's missing. Whatever it is, he's gonna fit that need. And then eventually we get to the turning stage. We're gonna begin to take the affection and bring in some control. He's gonna tell her, where do you want to go to dinner tonight? She says, I want to go back to McDonald's. That's our first date place. That's where we were. Yeah, but we're not gonna go there anymore. We're gonna start going to someplace else instead. Or I want to get you some makeup. Oh, I love that brand of lipstick. I don't want you wearing that lipstick anymore. I want you wearing this lipstick. Now, can she really complain, right? Her boyfriend's buying her nice things. But we start to see who's in charge, right? And then eventually, I've been spending all this money on you. And I can't believe I'd suggest this, but my friend, he thinks you're so beautiful. He's going to do this at a time and a way that's right. And maybe the first time it's going to be okay, whatever it is. But what victim survivors tell us is that once she's had sex with somebody for money, food, shelter, some reason other than wanting to be physically intimate with that person, then her self-esteem, which may have been low because of the vulnerability to begin with, ends up going through the floor. And so then he can really take advantage. So this is an excerpt from a book. You can buy books on trafficking, and here's one. And I just find this so powerful. You'll start to dress her, think for, own her. If you're a victim or sexually active, slow it down. Notice this. Don't speed it up, right? Slow it down. Slow it down. Take your time. After sex, take her shopping for one item. Hair and or nails is fine. So notice this. Sex leads to things. She'll develop a feeling of accomplishment. Sex leads to physical things, right? Then the shopping after a month will be replaced with cash. Lovemaking turns into raw sex. Now we get sex leads to cash. And we started to separate out the intimacy and the emotional intimacy, right? She's going to crave getting that intimacy back. And then after you've broken her spirit, she has no sense of self-value, right? Her value comes from the money that can be generated from the sex. And then you can just put a price tag on the item you manufacture, which is what you've done, right? You've taken a human being and you've converted her into a product just through this method, right? And the final stage, this is the simplest one, right? We've targeted somebody vulnerable, we've tricked her, we've turned her, and now we get to the kind of the easiest stage in a way, the most straightforward, which is the traumatizing. You come back tonight with $1,000. Now what happens if she doesn't come back with $1,000? She gets beat. Well, you know what? She gets beat is definitely one possibility, absolutely, and that definitely can happen, right? That's the one end. The thing is, though, he can also beat up her friend if it's Angie, right? Now we got to control that. He can have Angie beat up the friend, have the friend beat up somebody else, right? But remember, he's the source of food, shelter, etc. He's got all kinds of tools in his toolbox, right? No food for you tonight. I'm not going to get you that. No. I'm not going to buy you those clothes. No, you can't call your mom. No, you're going to be at home. I'm going to be going out with these other girls. You're going to be sitting in the back. And sometimes it may just be, because remember, he's running multiple women, if at all possible. So he can really play them off against each other. What a number of victim survivors have told me, sometimes the worst thing of all is just that the result is the silent treatment from him. You say, well, okay, the silent treatment, you mean because it precedes a beating, right? Because otherwise, if this guy's being so horrible, you'd be happy not to be talked to by him. Is it silent treatment must be because it's connected to physical violence? Not necessarily. If your whole world consists of the men who are paying to abuse you, the women who are also being used besides you and putting in competition with you, and then this guy who's putting himself as a god at the center of the universe, which is how these guys are setting themselves up. Yeah, the silent treatment could be the worst thing of all. Point is, he's got a vast spectrum of tools available to him to use against her that absolutely do include the physical violence that we would have thought of walking in the room, and that's definitely present. And again, I can't think of a case where there wasn't some of that going on, but also a vast array of other tools as well that he can use to keep her in check and keep her under control. So we've got our traffickers getting money from the buyers. Our buyers are highly motivated. And our victim survivors are highly what again? Because with a V, vulnerable, highly vulnerable. That's right. What happens between our motivated traffickers and our vulnerable victims? I think you'd agree, some pretty sophisticated manipulation. Now, would these techniques work on one of us, work on you? I would hate to have that level of creative energy aimed at me, I will say. I mean, the energy that went into what I just described, and again, that's just one example, right? I would hate to have somebody aiming their full force of creative energy at me. But I'll tell you what, if you are somebody who's experiencing some mental health issues and you're on the run and you're 14 and you're alone and all the stuff that may have happened in your life, is that going to work on you? Yeah, it works really, really, really well. Absolutely it does. So I'm now going to play a 911 call. And again, I just wanted to say this describes a potentially upsetting situation, just to make sure we're all aware of that. And I want you to think in this, what is consistent with the things that we've talked about so far, and what seems inconsistent or different or surprising to folks with that as well, and kind of evaluate that in connection with this. I think you have to click the thing up there. No problem. I think just have to...
911, where's your emergency? Hi, this is Barbara. and I'm gonna run away from Des Moines, Iowa, and I'm in big trouble. I'm afraid I'm about to get killed.
All right, honey. Honey, I'm gonna help you, okay? Are you at the Hilton Garden Inn right now?
Yes.
How old are you, honey?
I just turned 18. The people who are wanting to hurt me are just left.
What? Now you're Barb.
So I'm in the hotel room
Which hotel room are you in, Barb?
on floor 8 and on room 851.
851. Did they just leave?
Yeah, but I'm afraid they're gonna come back.
I'm gonna help you right now. You're gonna stay on the phone with me, and I will not hang up with you, okay? You promise me? Good girl. Now, who are those people? Do you know their names?
Yeah, one's name is Tyree Eric Jones, and the other one's, I don't know her last name, but her name's Bianca.
What's going on with them?
Well, they sucked me into coming here, so I ran away from home. In the last couple of days, they've been threatening me and saying that I owe them money, and if I don't give them their money, they're going to kill me. And I hide a pair of scissors under my pillow because I'm afraid that I need to defend myself. I don't want to be in
Don't worry,
anymore.
honey, I'm gonna help you, okay? I promise. No, I'm sending somebody there to come help you right now. Now, the guy named Tyree, is he black?
Yes, Tyree Eric Jones is his name.
Tyree Eric Jones. Now, how old is Tyree, do you think?
He's 18.
18? Is he from Iowa, like you?
I think so, but he has family here in Minnesota.
All right. And what is the girl white, black, Mexican, Asian?
The girl's black.
Black female, what's her name?
Bianca.
And how old is Bianca, do you think?
I think she said she was 23.
23? What's Bianca's last name?
I think it's Nickel or something, but she said she has a warrant here in Minnesota.
Des Moines, Iowa? To come to Minnesota for what? Did they ever tell you?
They told me I was supposed to make money, and they've been making me sleep with guys, and now I'm afraid I have something.
That's all right, honey. I'm going to send you a doctor, too, okay?
Okay.
When does it start, sweetie?
I don't. It's 30. I came here last week on Wednesday.
Now, is there anything I should know about, aside from what you've told me, sweetie? Is there any weapons in the room? Any drugs?
Like I said, I had a pair of scissors under my pillow because I'm afraid they're going to hurt me.
What do you have under your pillow, honey?
A pair of sharp scissors.
All right. Well, the officers, the next knock you hear at your door will be the officers, and I'm going to stay on the phone with you the whole time, okay?
So we're going to talk about what we heard that was consistent or inconsistent. I might ask, if somebody has a lot of experience with this issue, I might ask you to hold off answering this because I want to get other folks in. You can see how that goes. But anything we heard that seems consistent with what we talked about so far? Anybody? Just toss something out. Fear. I heard fear. Yeah. So she's afraid. Remember that I said that there's not necessarily violence involved in these situations, but there's no legal requirement. Sorry, there really always is, in my experience, always has been, but there's no legal requirement. Yes, fear, absolutely. And what's she afraid of? She's afraid of, we talked about physical violence, we heard. She expressed another fear as well. Let me catch that? Of an STD, that she might have STD, absolutely, yeah. What else do we hear that's consistent? She's away from home, yeah. And how is it that she became away from home? She ran away. Yeah, okay, so right there's a vulnerability too. That's exactly right. Yeah. Anything else that anybody heard that seemed consistent? Said she's in debt. Thank you. That's an excellent point. Yeah. How did she phrase that? Anybody catch that? I owe them money. She said, they say I owe them money, right? So we got a targeting point. She's a runaway. We got a turning point. Hey, boy, I've been spending this money. You owe us money. Absolutely, right? And she's afraid. I don't know if you could hear this in her voice. It's probably pretty difficult. But this young woman, we caught her age, right? People did. Just turned 18, yeah. So she actually has a mental age much younger than that, this young woman. She's got mental vulnerabilities as well. Maybe tough to tell from the voice. So there's a vulnerability as well. Yeah. Anything else anybody heard that seemed consistent? She doesn't know their names. Yeah, we didn't really talk about that at the beginning. That certainly can be very common. It can be the case that she may know their names, but certainly that she may not. Absolutely. Yeah, totally. Anything that seems inconsistent, maybe surprising about this, especially for somebody who might be new to the issue? Yeah. So, There's a woman involved. That's an interesting point, yeah. So we've got a woman and a man who are the alleged traffickers. And I'll just say on that, these situations get very, very complicated. So you might have caught the ages of the woman and the man. I mean, I think we sort of think naturally, well, the man is the trafficker and the woman is maybe somebody else being trafficked. We might think, did you catch the ages, though? Who's older? Yeah, the woman is older. She's only 23. The man, I think, is 19, I think, right? 18, yeah, he's just 18. So just a little bit of background on that, because this is really important for us to recognize how complicated these situations are. In the view of our office, the woman actually was the trafficker. They're both traffickers, but the woman was actually more culpable. Our office charged both of these individuals. In the view of an organization that we work closely with, that works with victim survivors, and probably it actually has a table out there, Breaking Free, was working with us, and then their view, it really was the other way around, that the man really was much more the trafficker, and the woman is somebody who had been trafficked previously, been prostituted previously, and is way more in a victim survivor role. I think I'm describing that right. And just to realize that in these cases, the lines between victim survivor, witness, involved somewhat, trafficker can really get confusing. Even somebody who we might all completely agree is a victim survivor may well be involved in criminality because of the way this whole situation works. So these get very, very complicated and very, very subtle, these situations. So I'm so glad that you brought that up, yeah. Anything else that seems surprising for somebody who is fairly new to this? Yeah, sure.
She had scissors under her pillow, so there's the suggestion that she might want to fight.
Yeah, scissors under a pillow, so the suggestion that she may want to fight. Yeah. You mean as opposed to you might think, oh no, somebody wouldn't be fighting. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, again, that gets complicated because I've talked about how there's violence and fear and that sort of thing involved. And I think we naturally would think, boy, if somebody's going to be violent towards you at some point, you're going to want to fight back or somehow defend yourself and receive some kind of protection. Yeah. Are people surprised that she was left in the room alone with a phone? I'm kind of seeing some nods. Yeah, right. I mean, it's kind of like, whoa, that seems sort of crazy. Let's think about that just for a second. So with prostitution, where there's a third person presence, that's sex trafficking, can you think of situations where the person being prostituted would be in a room that might even have a phone in it, and the trafficker wouldn't be in the room? When she's waiting for a buyer to show up, when the buyer's there, when the buyer has just left. Does that make sense? I mean, you're not going to have the trafficker just be sitting there right outside in the hall, right? Even more than that, though, think about it. Targeting, tricking, turning, traumatizing. When he's taking girl number 5, as I said, he's trying to run multiple women, right? Multiple girls, so he can get a lot of money. When he's got girl number 5 at McDonald's for this special first date. Where are girls 1 through 4? Are they at the next table and he's sort of keeping an eye on them? No, I mean, ideally, from his perspective, they're out making money for him doing this. So this is a critical point. The fact that she's in a room without the trafficker there with a phone is not unusual in the least. In fact, she's very likely going to have a cell phone and be able to call. There's nothing, as this is such a critical point, there is nothing physically stopping most victim survivors from calling for help. There is nothing physically stopping most victim survivors from calling for help, okay? So first, what is surprising in that case about this situation? That she did, right? So any theories, again, maybe for somebody who's doesn't have a lot of experience with this, as to why she called when so many others don't? It's early on. Yeah, so one thing is I often hear from folks, well, she thought she was going to die, and that's why she called. I mean, she's terrified for her life, right? But the fact is, any victim survivors I've spoken with, there are times they think they're going to die, and they still may not call. People say, well, she had a disease, she wanted to go to the hospital, she thought she might have an STD. Any of these situations are actually not unusual in that way, and people still don't call. But the point about it being early, that's interesting. So expand on that. Somebody said, what does it mean? Yeah, ma'am. I said that she was mentally vulnerable. So what difference do you see that making? She might not, because mentally vulnerable, might not have logically seen this could happen. Yeah, although I have to say that again, when you've got that level of creative energy aimed at you, plenty of people who are extremely highly functioning, there's no limitation at all, maybe in life circumstances, they find themselves caught up in this. So there's nothing, so in that aspect, I don't know that it is. But the point that it's early, so remember so how long has it been that she's been with these people? Anybody catch that? Yeah, less than a week, right? I said last Wednesday I came, so it must have been within the prior week. The excerpt that I read from the book that you can buy, do you notice how long it said that after how long should you replace, the shopping after X is replaced with cash after sex? Anybody remember that? A month, the shopping after. You need to take, these traffickers, they take time. It's like this process, right? So the theory here is these people just rush things. So here's the background. They met this young woman online. The guy did online, so check that box as well. They became boyfriend, girlfriend online, check that box. And he said to her, you should come up to Minnesota and be with me. And she said, I'd love to, but I don't have any money for a bus ticket. He said, no problem. You could have sex with a friend of mine in Des Moines, where you're living, and he'll pay for the bus ticket. Because, that's what you do, right? You have your girlfriend have sex with a friend to pay for things. It's just crazy. So the assumption is that once they got her to do that and she shows up here, and they're pretty young too, they figured that they get greedy, right? They just figured, hey, let's just get her to work. So the theory is, and I don't know this for sure, but it seems like they just rushed things, right? If they'd taken the time, they probably could have worked her and left her alone, et cetera, and they rushed things. And what happened is then, because of their incompetence, basically, then this call ends up being made in that way. Point is, we cannot trust that the traffickers, that people trying to exploit, not just traffickers, buyers as well, trying to exploit young people, are going to be acting in this way. For many reasons, victim survivors are not going to be calling for help, for reasons that we'll be exploring this morning, and I think from well on as well. So this is something that was in the room. This is just a little script. We very often see this. Or this was from this particular case. Hello, my name is X. I'm fake name it'll be. Are you law enforcement? Prices, etc. We also found this in the room. I don't know how well you can see this, and we can maybe turn down the lights down a bit. I don't know if you're still up there. We've got a vanilla Visa credit card. You can see the condom wrapper. What's the relevance of the Snickers bar wrapper? I don't know this for sure, but anybody? It's probably her meal. I mean, the thing is, a Snickers bar is what you give somebody. I mean, first of all, it's candy, and she's fairly young, but a Snickers bar is what you give somebody when you don't care about their long-term health, right? You want to give them energy and protein to keep going to service the next guy, right? That's the food that she's eating in there, yeah. And so similarly, maybe you can still keep the lights somewhat down. So this is not the young woman in question. It's not. But let's just assume for a moment that it is. Or this young woman, or this young woman. The young woman on the right, these are some past pictures of her, the same young woman, if I can do this. There we go. These are pictures from booking photos, is my understanding, from prostitution arrests. Same young woman, and please keep an eye on the eyes in each case of each of the young women. This is the young woman who's in the middle. The picture of her is in the upper right. And this is the young woman who we first saw. Look how young she looks in the upper left there. Now, what we often talk about with police is, by the time you interact with the person who's been victimized by this, that's going to be after other interactions. By the way, these are prostitution arrests, but they could be arrests for other things, other interactions not just with criminal justice, but other parts of our system where, she's going to be doing what she needs to do to survive. And maybe she gets lucky in the sense that although she had vulnerabilities, she ran into incompetent traffickers. And so we all caught her in the first upper left picture there, right? But much more commonly, no, there's all these other experiences. So by the time we interact with her, she's not going to be feeling real supported by society and feeling really good. I mean, we need to remember that we're talking about people, pardon me, let me go back for just a second. We're talking about people who've experienced some really difficult circumstances. And the end result of all of it is they're going to be uncooperative probably with all of us and untrusting. And by the way, trusting the person who is in fact meeting her needs in ways that we are not. So what's the impact of all this? It's extremely, extremely dangerous. I mean, we know the impact of a single incident of sexual assault. We don't think of prostitution in that way, but that's what it is. It's sexual violence where money's taking the place of consent. And we know that, of course, there's going to be all of these sorts of results. And then also a lot of fatality. A lot of people die being hurt by the trafficker, by the buyer, disease and poor health care and poor nutrition and all those things, and not just buyers and traffickers, just sort of people in general. You think about serial killers killing prostitutes, bodies of 10 prostitutes found buried, that sort of thing. Remember the triangle again. This is somebody who in our society we are not lifting up the people experiencing this. The young woman who disappeared actually kind of roughly around the same time as Jacob Wetterling, and sort of her life ends up being summarized in this way. So we've been talking all about the one side of the triangle, and I'm going to be closing here talking about the buyers, because of course if men aren't buying, the whole thing goes away, right? Where are victim survivors being bought and sold? Well, we know now truck stops, we know now all over massage parlors, hotels, etc., and then certainly online, just like where victim survivors are being found. Backpage.com is a very common site. Actually, Backpage is not, I believe it's still not carrying ads because of a dispute that they're having, but then there's other sites as well. This is just an example of some ads. And you click on an ad, and then you can make the interaction. So who is going to these ads for victim survivors? Well, it's men, but it's men of all types. ages, race, they have daughters, they have sons, they don't. The two commonalities is they're men and they got money. They got jobs. And what kind of jobs do they have? Well, we can probably guess the answer to this question right now, right? We've got a former hospital CEO on the left there, a former police chief on the right, former Canadian member of parliament in the middle there. Want to point out prosecutors and elected officials. We've got teachers, doctors, pastors, people of all different backgrounds and all over the state. And anytime they've done one of these stings, there actually was just an assistant commissioner of commerce just last week, I believe it was. So I mean, anytime they do one of these stings anywhere in the state, they're finding men who are buying human beings. And what these men do, and what I'm not necessarily these particular men, but there are actual sites where you can go to get the product you're buying rated, right? Just like a hotel or a restaurant or anything that you're going to be buying. So you can do the same thing for human beings. So this is a site called the Erotic Review, and you click on the name up top, and it gives you some really helpful statistics, right? It's got her hair color and hair type, etc. It's got her breast size, breast cup, etc. It just rates her in all these disgusting, and I'm actually not going to read every single one of them because they're just disgusting. All these disgusting ways. And then you go to the comments section. So see these, as far as treating women's objects, well, hell yeah, we're seeing whores after all. Okay, she belongs to me for that hour, half hour, right? You can make her your sex toy for whatever you want if you know how to crack her. You know, I could have walked out because I thought she might be trafficked. I went ahead anyway, but it was a real disappointment. So you should avoid that big time. Well, thank you for that piece of consumer advice, right? I mean, just incredible. So the theme that comes through in these comments is just such an important theme for us to engage on, right? If our traffickers are highly motivated and our victims are highly vulnerable, what are our buyers? Highly entitled. I have money. She may be a nice person. Hey, there may be some nice things going on, but for that time, I have purchased this human being. This person belongs to me for that time. I can do whatever I want with her. And we hear from victim survivors about the most disgusting, awful, racist, ugly, horrible things coming out in that time because he owns that human being at that point. Highly entitled. Now, we can maybe think that some of these guys in the truck stop would think, hey, congratulations. She gets to have sex with me and she also gets money. Well, now we know the reason she's in that hotel room or in the cab of that truck is because of some vulnerability she was targeted for. So what's happening between those people is commercial sexual violence where money's taking the place of consent. And so really if we look at that, we talk about traffickers and buyers and pimps and johns, but aren't we really talking about exploiters? We're talking about exploiters all in all. And this brings us back to this concept then, that really this is just one piece of a broader picture. And that's why I say sexual exploitation and sex trafficking. More broadly, looking at the ways that somebody who has power is taking advantage of somebody who's vulnerable. We've got a situation in a rural community where, this stepdad is having his friends take the kids upstairs and sexually assault them because that's what they are doing. We've got landlords and cheerleading teammates. We hear incredible things about landlords telling young moms, hey, I'm going to have to raise your rent, I have to evict you unless I can get some favors out of this. All these ways that somebody who has power is taking advantage of somebody who is vulnerable. That, I think, is a really good theme for the morning and for our work, is those two things. Somebody who has power, and very often men viewing women a certain way, and somebody who's vulnerable. And if we can lift up people who are vulnerable, if we can have men stop thinking of women this way and stop interacting with women this way and stop feeling entitled to own and to use a human being in that way, then we'll have done some incredibly powerful work. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you to Trafficking Justice. And thank you for committing yourselves to learn about this issue and to lift people up. Really appreciate it. Thank you.